Kentucky news, October 10th. It's actually, I'm gonna do news too, but this sets the context. I'm doing some history, some past news within the last, decade or so or less than, okay? And it's about the LMPD, right? The LMPD has had a pretty shitty, legacy here in Louisville, Kentucky. Well, let's just go through some of these cases that I came across. We'll start off with Atwan Earsery. So Antwanearsery. So Antoine Ursery, he robs a woman. So he's 21 years old. He robs a woman, and he actually shoots at the cops. He shoots 6 times at the police, and he's on the run. So you can't catch Atwan Earsery, okay? Atwan Earsery is at large. He shot at the cops and was able to run away. So that shows us, one thing. It's possible to get away from the police. The police are human beings. They don't catch everybody. And the way this gentleman got away from them was by firing 6 shots at them, and they fired back, and then he was able to get away. Okay? I've even heard, a Viper Squad member talk about how here he walked up to the a group of folks and thought he was going to be this badass and be like, all right, you all put your guns down, and they all picked up their guns. He was like, okay, got to get the fuck out of here. So there is a realistic human perspective to all this. Mao Zedong says all power comes from the barrel of a gun. And since all power comes out of the barrel of a gun, here you have Atwan Ursery, who, is firing shots at the cops, and he was able to get away. So that verifies Mao Zedong's assessment of the culture, right? So you have Atwan Ursery, who just recently, I think this is this year, I don't know. Okay, so you can check that later. Atwan Ursery. You also have Michael Newby, okay? And Michael Newby generated a lot of attention here in Louisville. He was a 19-year-old who got murdered by an undercover officer. So there's a guy who was with Newby. The guy was with Newby, and they said, the way he says that, it makes, no sense, but he was an undercover officer, and he said that Newby tried to take his gun, and then Newby got shot in the back. They also said that he tried to, run him over with a car. I think this gentleman. So, it seems like any excuse to murder a black person is okay. It's like, oh, the cops killed somebody. Well, why'd they do it? Well, he tried to run him over with a car. Well, he's undercover, so you didn't even know he was an officer. And this motherfucker, could have just been playing some shit. You don't know what's going on. So you have, what was the crime? What was it? They said he had a gun on his waistband or some shit. So he's in a car and he's trying to get away and he's shot in the back. So Michael Newby is a 19-year-old who was shot in the back. And then the police chief fired the officer, who committed this murder. So the officer was fired. So Michael Newby is shot in the back. I think he was shot several times too. Eventually the family settled out for $250,000. Mackenzie Mattingly was the LMPD cop that shot Michael Newby. Timothy Greer was a gentleman who was caught on videotape getting his just butt kicked by the LMPD. 4 of these dogs, of these pigs, was, sitting there assaulting this peaceful man who was doing, just didn't want to get hit in the head. He's lying on the ground. They're sitting there just punching his head as hard as they can. You could kill somebody, pop their, break their nose, pop their nose straight up into the brain, hit their throat, collapse their entire throat. So you got Michael Newby got shot up, and you got this Antoine Ursery who shot the cops and got away. Michael Newby didn't shoot at the cops, and he's killed. You also have Desmond Rudolph in May 1999. So this goes back a little bit farther. Desmond Rudolph was shot by 2 LMPD police officers, and 22 shots were fired to murder Desmond Rudolph. 22 shots. 22 shots. Gene Sherrod, the chief of police, was fired by Mayor Dave Armstrong in March of 2000, the next year. And when Gene Sherrod, the chief of police, was fired by the mayor for murdering Desmond Rudolph, 22 shots, you have the LMPD protesting on our streets. Okay? So that would be like Obama firing, McChrystal, the head of the army, and there'd be protests out in the streets. The army just starts marching on the streets. That's a military coup d'etat. So, this is past. You don't have the same police chief or the same mayor at the time. But that does set the tone for how Louisville views things around here. Okay? Murder Desmond Rudolph, that's okay. Nobody, there's very few protests or outrage from the white folks. But fire the man who is responsible for murdering that black person, and then there's protests out in the streets. 1975, white people did the same exact thing. Black people wanted to get integrated. White people in massive numbers, were out in the streets protesting for a year. Blaine Hudson, U of L professor who died recently, wrote the history book of Louisville, Kentucky, Black History book. He says that it was a mini civil war for an entire year here. In 1975, it was a mini civil war. Mini civil war for an entire year because we were one of the last cities to get integrated. One of the last cities to get integrated, one of the first ones to desegregate. 2006, 2007 ruling, right? That new ruling that just came out. So you have, you have Michael Newby, you got Atwan Ursery, Timothy Greer, Desmond Rudolph, Leon Brackens. Leon Brackens he died last year, and in 2012. In April 2001, this is a feeble old man, a feeble, tiny old man, like 90 pounds. Like he was small, and you could just, a child could have beat him up. It's not, I don't know what kind of person would think that they're men for beating up a 90-year-old, man. And so, there's a slow speed chase on the interstate. They stopped the slow speed chase at Breckenridge and Watterson. And that's significant because both of those names are white supremacists. Breckenridge's, they were for slavery during Civil War time. And then you also have Henry Watterson, who murdered black people all the time. That's what Henry Watterson did. Fort Pillow, slaughtered black people. He was Confederate for the cause. Rode with Nathan Bedford Forrest. And we got the Watterson Expressway. And at the corner of Watterson and Breckenridge, the name of two white supremacists who have their names honored by being put on Louisville streets or an interstate. The Watterson is an expressway. They stopped the car that Leon Brackens was in. Leon Brackens was not driving. He was in the car with a lady, and the lady was driving, and he called 911. So he's the one that called it in. The reason they was chasing this gentleman is because he had called in the 911. So they chasing him. The car pulls over eventually, and he's got his hands up when they come around, and he's sitting in the car, with a seatbelt, and immediately the cop takes the seatbelt off, throws Leon Brackens down on the ground, and they all just start pummeling him, just start hitting him and hitting him. There's 4 guys just sitting there hitting him over and over and over again. Leon Brackens goes to the hospital for 8 months. Leon Bracken is confined to a wheelchair. Leon Bracken eventually dies because of the actions of the LMPD. No apology was issued. The police chief, nobody ever comes out and says sorry. When Desmond Rudolph was shot, the chief of police, he was fired not because of the murder, but the chief of police made some really insensitive comments regarding. He gave the officers who murdered Desmond Rudolph a medal. So he's insulting, the black community, but also the poor community, anybody who's victimized by the police. They're insulting them, saying that if the police murder you in cold blood and all the evidence appears that that they was murdered in cold blood, you'll still get an award for it. It doesn't fucking matter. You're a cop, you murder somebody, you get a medal. You know, you get rewarded for that. If you got a badge, you know, that's a I can kill license. And actually that that's another thing that had happened here in Louisville. You had down by it was at a 4th Street Live at some sort of bar, and dude goes up to this police officer who's off duty's girlfriend, and he's talking to the girlfriend, and the off-duty cop flashes a badge. Look, hey, I'm a cop. You know, get away from me. You need to back up. You can't hit on my wife. You can't hit on my girlfriend, whoever this lady was. And as soon as he does that, the guy's like, who gives a fuck? You're off duty. You can't just flash a badge and that means something. And he's like, oh yeah. And so it's disrespect, you know. Basically, it's a crime to be disrespectful. It's not a crime to talk to somebody's lady. But it is a crime to be disrespectful. Dude flashes badge. Who gives a shit? You're off duty. Now I'm going to fight you. He got away with it. So having a badge is a license to kill. Hey, look, I have a badge. And it's like, why are you showing me that? That's terroristic threatening. So basically, if a person shows their badge, you know, that's terroristic threatening. They're going to try to hurt you. You should take that as a warning, as a threat. It's like, hey, look, I have a badge. I'm allowed by the state to murder and beat up and to commit any horrible, violent atrocities against anybody that I want to. And I can just lie about it and make it up. What are you going to do? Tell somebody in the police department you think somebody's going to be a Serpico? Look what happens to Chris Dorner. You try to be a Serpico, look what happened to Serpico. We don't have enough Serpicos on the police station, on the dockets. So they straight up murdered Leon Brackens. They have, you know, Desmond Rudolph, straight up murdered Desmond Rudolph. Michael Newby, shot in the back. Shot in the back. A 19-year-old kid shot in the back by an undercover. So who knows what that undercover could have been doing all the illegal shit, you know, with him. They said he was in a stolen car, I think. So even if he was with them, you know, at the stolen car, how do you know he wasn't doing it or enticing it or the one that started it? You know, like there's so many questions there. An undercover person could be any person. How do you know Michael Newby's not an undercover officer? You know, for the FBI or something. You know, just because you dressed in plain clothes, just because you signed some document beforehand, they're allowed to lie to you. They're allowed to use any type of apparatus in order to, you know, basically get you. And a lot of times, just the culture of intimidation that they bring. I blame the whole, all the society's oppression is based on the state's authority and the cops' authority. It's Leviathan. There's one strong gang and they dominate over everybody. And people say, oh, they're doing a good job because there's not riots in the streets. People ain't rioting in the streets. Order is the easiest thing to obtain. I mean, that's like what they train for, right? They all think of the American people as the Iraqi insurgent, right? They look at us as the enemies. And since we're the enemies, and that's already their mentality, you know, well, it's bullshit. We live in a police state and it's bullshit, okay? The culture of intimidation, the oppression that they put on everybody, the hierarchy, they set the example, and by setting the example, everybody else follows in line and does what they do because they think what they do is how you're supposed to be. Might is right. Violence works. Do as the fuck as I say. I flashed a badge. I've told you I'm a cop. You need to back the fuck up. Don't look me in the eye. You know, even if I have no badge on me, if I'm undercover. There's another gentleman who was undercover off duty. Charles Wheeler. He's off duty, just starts hitting dude. That's the guy who flashes the badge, right? And off duty who flashes a badge. There's also another gentleman who, you know, flashes a badge and shoots a dude in the back. Zachary Hogland was a victim. Captain James Conley hit him twice with a mag light. And Captain James Conley was not indicted by the grand jury. So you can straight up just hit motherfuckers, right? That's not a felony. But if that motherfucker who's straight up hitting people fight back, then Timothy Greer is being shown on the fucking media as being the one that's being the aggressor. Well, you had a mag light to your head and you don't like that shit? You have a mag light hit on your head and you don't like that shit. Well, what, you gonna fight back? Well, you're a cop, you're allowed to do it. But if you hit a cop with a mag light because they're being disruptive, right? It's the same logic. They're human, we're human. What's good for the goose, good for the gander. What's just, you know, justice is blind. So what is just for one is just for all. It's okay to hit somebody in the head with a mag light, boom, boom, right? If you're allowed to hit someone in the head with a mag light, then you should be allowed to hit a police officer who's out of control with mag light. But that's not the case. So they're hypocrites. We live in a hypocritical society where cops can do willy-nilly any violence and all violence that they want to do. But if anybody even defends himself or just shows disrespect, they get arrested.